Good evening. Today we're going to be doing a tune in the style of Chris Stussy. Up the Stuss, but more importantly, up the Chels. Let's get into it.
Standing in your doorway, roses in my hand. Dance away your heartache, give all you got left. I got all these soul lights moving in my head. I found out the hard way, the devil made me dance. The devil made me dance.
And there we have it. Right, let's run through it. So a few things to keep in mind as we're going through this. All of these chords as we're going through the song kind of change section to section. So every section we've got a very different rhythm, mainly is the difference. So these chords at the start with our pianos have got their own rhythm. Then in the second bit where it's just the synth has a different rhythm and a bit more of a melody. And then we go to these synths when the vocal comes back in and the rhythm is lending itself more to the rhythm of these vocals. And then in the drop, the rhythm is a bit less intense. We've got a bit less going on because we've got some call and response with other synths. So none of these sections are exactly the same. So I'm not going to break every single one of those down because they're actually fairly similar in terms of the harmonic structure. But just keep in mind that they are all different, and in some ways that kind of helps the evolution a little bit, so no section gets too boring. So we're starting off with these piano chords. I always find that layering one lower piano and one higher piano, I always get a way better result than just having one piano by itself. That's what we've done here. So Chris Stussy uses a lot of chorus on his piano. So we've just got this chorus, Ableton stock with a dry wet. I'm just using an M1 as our lower piano, and then our high piano we've got a contact. It's got really harsh attack and really sparkly on the top end, so those two together really work nicely together. Keeping in mind like these rhythms as well, one thing I do like to do is try and have some cohesion between the vocal and the instruments that we put in. So especially this last bit here, when the vocal goes laddy up, we're sort of following that same rhythm. Laddy up. We don't have the same rhythm with the piano as the vocal for most of it, but this last little bit, we're just adding that rhythm that's going in line with the rhythm of the vocal. So they sort of marry at the end of this phrase, which is quite nice. Roses in my hand, dance away your heartache, give all you got left. I got all these soul lights. And again, another thing to keep in mind is we're leaving a lot of gaps, so you don't have to fill the space with so much stuff. When I started doing this, did have loads of stuff going on and ended up taking out quite a lot. So we've got a full bar there with nothing in. And I think leaving that space makes the rhythm, when it does come back in, a little bit more impactful. Roses in my hand, dance away your heartache, give all you got left. I got all these. And we're just doing these like little flicks and little fills. So instead of having these little bits here, these dun 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 dun, instead of having them exactly the same as the other note, just to create some variation, I've just taken one of these notes out here and put a different note in. So it's ever so slightly different. That just helps it feel a bit less boring. Because if it's just the same chord doing all the same notes, it would feel a little bit lifeless, I think. I found out the hard way, the devil made me dance. The devil made me Alright, so we come to these main saws, and the way that we can break this down is we've got two sections of the harmony going on. So we've got this top section, which is the melody, and then this bottom section, which are the chords. So if we just mute these top bits for now. So very basic chords. So we're in A sharp minor. We start on the F, which is the 5th. We go to the C, which is the 3rd. And then we go to the D sharp, which is the 4th. And then on top of that, we have our main melody. And I think if we were going to spend a little bit more time on it, I could get that melody a little bit more catchy. It's not amazing in my eyes at the moment. One thing that's interesting about this melody is we've got a little accidental in here. There's something weird about this key. I don't quite know exactly what key it's in, the way that I've done these chords. But you see we've got this G here, G sharp, and we're also using the F. So we've got these 3 notes next to each other. So I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, that you don't have to keep to every single note being in key. But if we listen to that, it doesn't really sound like it's out of key, this note especially. To me, actually, in some ways, this one is the one that sounds out of key. But actually, it kind of doesn't matter. So we've got these 2 sections with these saws. One is the chords that we just listened to, and then we've got that hook on top. So the way that sometimes I'm thinking when we're structuring chords like this is have the chords as quite generic chords. You know, these are just triads. So the 1st, 3rd, 5th, 1st, 3rd, 5th, 1st, 3rd, 5th. And then on top of that, the way that we have some harmonic evolution is by doing a little bit of a lead on top of that. Because there's no vocals in this section, this is the thing that's we're trying to grab the attention and trying to get a bit of an earworm in there. And one thing that I love about Chris Stussy, do you know what? Before making this video, I hadn't really listened to much Chris Stussy. And I'm very impressed by a lot of his production. One thing I have noticed is he uses a lot of organic sounds. And I think this sound, I genuinely think this is exactly the same sample that he uses in Wide Awake. It sounds exactly the same. I don't want to A-B it to you because YouTube police will get me. But have a little listen to Wide Awake when the chord stabs come in, because that sounds to me almost identical. So we've got this little flute thing just sort of sat on top, and then again we've got this other flute just kind of sitting in the background, giving a bit of ambience. And I've done some little changes with the pitch bend. So if we click on our audio, go to envelopes, clip, and then transposition, I've done a little bit of pitch bend just so it fits a bit better with those chords. So we're just taking it up 1 semitone at the end of that sound. And I think that's quite a distinctive technique that Chris Stussy uses. So we have this like lovely contrast of these saw waves, which are synths, and then sitting behind that, we've got these very organic sounding synths or flutes or whatever. We notice just at the end of this phrase as well, I'm just holding on this one note. We're not having the exact same rhythm at the end here as we have in the first half. We're just transitioning with that note being held a bit. And just to help that transition a bit, I've just taken the cutoff frequency down as well, so the sound moves a little bit. And then we open it back up when we come into this build section. And then you notice the difference between the first bit and the second bit. The rhythm slightly changes. It's a little bit more simple because the vocal is coming in. The vocal is like the main thing that we want the listener to hear. So we don't want to clutter the song up too much with like too much going on with those saws. So it's not as complicated as this first half, because the first half is a standalone. This is the main thing that we're listening to. And then when we come to this section, we want the listener's attention to go from here down to our vocals. So we're just leaving a little bit of space for our vocals, so it's a bit less complicated. Even something like these last two, I've not got any movement on the top, so we've not got a melody going on like we did in the first half. They're just very straight because we just want that vocal to have a bit of space to breathe. So when we come into this drop, there's some amazing things that Chris Stussy does that I really enjoyed listening to. One was, let's just mute this saw and just listen to the bass and the drums. So he very rarely follows the rhythmic pattern of the saws with his bass. The bass is almost doing its own thing rhythmically. Obviously, we're still using the root notes, but the actual rhythm kind of is sitting alone by itself. And if we listen to those two together, they're not doing the same thing. Sometimes we've got the same rhythm. Sometimes we have this cohesion and then it will bend out, the rhythm will change and then come back. So we have some bits of cohesion and then some bits that are just totally a rhythm by itself, and also stuff like having really long elongated notes. So let's have a listen to those two together. And he always uses basses to fill in bits of the melody. So these little bits here, and then this little tail at the end of this phrase, they're almost something that the listener would hear. So quite often when you're making music, the bass is effectively just filling out the low end and just adding to the vibe. But the way that Chris Stussy uses it is actually as another melodic instrument. And it makes such an amazing difference because even just those two notes, you have them at an octave higher, right? So you don't have them down here, you have them an octave higher, so they're a bit more present. And the higher the note is, the more that the listener will sort of latch on to that melody. But it's an interesting way of using like your saws to have a melody, and then we have a bit of a gap and our bass kind of takes over the melody, and then we come back to the saw doing a melody, and then at the end of this phrase the bass comes back and does a melody. So the bass is effectively fulfilling two roles, one being what a bass normally does, bit of rhythm, filling out that low end, but also providing bits of the melody as well. And I think that's a really nice way of having this contrast by one instrument taking the reins of the melody, then it passes the baton on to bass, which does the melody. And then we've also got these little lead bits in here as well, which is a very Chris Stussy sound, very easy to do. I've just got this saw to square and then a saw wave, 7 semitones up, filter on it. Envelope 1 is affecting the cutoff, and we've got a little bit of processing on it, and that's literally it. So there's very, very easy sound. And the main thing that gets the vibe of that sound is this +7. So if we had that at 0, let's give it much more of a Chris Stussy vibe, add that +7. And the way that I've structured that is we don't want stuff piled on top of each other. So we've got this saw here, and then when this lead comes in, we've got no saws going on. So we let the saw come in, the saw stops, and we let the lead breathe, and then the saw comes back in. It's not necessarily a golden rule to do that, but I just felt it was a much more impactful way of doing it because you really hear that much better. So doing it that way, you really take the listener by the hand and say, right, you're listening to this now you're listening to this, and now we go back to this. And to get back into these saws, at first felt a little bit flat. So what I did is did a little reverse saw into this next saw. So this is the chord that we knew that we were going to reverse into. So I just copied that, put a really long reverb on there. Created a new audio track by pressing Command T, and then if we just highlight this section, Command C to copy, and then Option Command V, and then that bounces out the audio. So now we can just press R and reverse that. And that's exactly what we put in this little section here. So it's just an easy way to bring that back in, because if we didn't have that reverse, let's have a listen. It works fine, but it just feels like there's something missing. So having that saw in there just really helps us bring this synth back in a little easier. And I've not made that synth the same twice round, so we could very easily have just done that exact same thing second time round, but it was just a little bit boring. So we've got the same little diddle, but this note is a little bit higher, and then we just sort of build up, just following those chords really. So this section and this section are totally different, so it doesn't just feel like one thing is on loop. So a few things that I noticed about his drums. One is it's very tambourine driven. I mean, certainly Wide Awake, which this is based on, very tambourine driven. That's where a lot of the sort of swing is coming from. So that's why we've got this little tambourine. And he also does something really interesting, which I've not really heard much. So he's got 2 hats going on in that song. So 4 hats on every offbeat. But then he's got a second hat which only does the first 3 and negates the last one. So normally we'd do it like this. So let's just listen to those hats. But the way he's done it is he's taken out the last one of just one of those hats. So it sounds like this. So you have that dun 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 da dun 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 da, which is very interesting. I've genuinely never heard that very often. You tend to have almost the opposite, where you'd have a new open hi-hat on this section. So you'd have like a tss, 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 tss. But doing it the opposite way around, it's quite cool. I've never really heard that. It's a sort of inversion of what you would typically think to do, which I really like. I've actually done a similar thing with our rides here. So in the second half of the rides, got these rides going on. So it's a very similar principle, but instead of this, it's twice the length that we take that last one out. And in very Chris Stussy style as well, is he has a lot of echoed vocals going on in the background of the drop. They're really just sort of background ambience kind of noises. So we're just taking little snippets of the vocal. And we've just taken out, you know, some of the high end, a bit of the low end. So it's not the full frequency range. So it does sit in the back a little bit more. I've got a reverb on there that's very, very wet. And similar with this one here as well. Very echoed. This Fade to Grey actually is a Ableton stock preset, which I'd highly recommend anyone to use because it really, really sounds great. So we just got those peppered in. So again, it's not like a proper lead sound. It's not the thing that we're trying to get the listener to hear right at the forefront, but it's just creating a bit of ambience in the back. So if we take those out, you can hear that it can feel a little bit thin without those. And then we bring them back in. And there we have it. Chris Stussy, very new to my listening. Like I said, I've never really listened to Chris Stussy before. It's not generally my vibe, but I've been very impressed listening to his stuff. And he's from the Netherlands, I think, and they are absolute wizards of melody. And you can really hear that in his music. So up the Stuss. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope it's helped. Please do like and subscribe and all those good things. And love to your mothers.